What's all this about?
Well, most people working or volunteering with children in New South Wales want safe and happy places for them. Unfortunately, some lack the right skills or haven't had enough training. Others actually want to harm them.
Not here, though.
They held a royal commission into how children in Australia were harmed by adults in organisations. One of the things they found that helps keep children safe is that adults should be able to recognise abuse, including the steps leading up to it, and know how to respond to it.
I'm not a big fan of this kind of thing.
But the more you know about it, the more you'll be able to prevent it.
Hi, my name's Cindy. I'm from the New South Wales office of the Children's Guardian. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the country we're on today, the Dharawal people, and pay my respects to First Nations elders past, present and emerging. I know some of you will feel uncomfortable about what we'll be discussing, but there's a good reason to listen. Think about the children who come to your organisation. Don't they have a right to be safe? To feel safe? Don't their parents have a right to expect them to be looked after well when they're in your care? The United Nations has a convention. It says that in all actions concerning children, their best interests should be the primary consideration. In New South Wales, we have laws and regulations designed to protect them. We also have the Child Safe Standards. The intention of all these things is to keep children safe. First up, we're going to look at what abuse is. Then, we're going to discuss how to stop it happening or what to do if you recognise it. Don't worry, there are a lot of things you can do to prevent it. Most of us, quite rightly, believe the people we live with and work alongside are good. They have the best interests of young people and the community at heart. But some adults want to harm children, or they lack the skills to care for them properly. You should think about how you might react if a child challenges you, especially if you're tired or frustrated. Don't be afraid to ask for help or training if you need it. Learning how to de-escalate a situation is essential, because lashing out and using physical violence against a child is never okay. If you're working with children, you must be able to manage your behaviour. You need to comply with your organisation's behavioural expectations. Recognising some kinds of harm can be hard because we all have different life experiences. What one person finds acceptable, someone else may not. Your childhood, belief systems and cultural upbringing all affect how you act regarding a child's gender, race, religion or sexuality. Okay, a quick exercise on the subject. Think of something you heard in your own childhood which wouldn't be acceptable now. For example, my dad believed in a good clout around the ears. Anyone else?
Our coach would train us in 40-degree heat, without breaks and without water. Said it toughened us up.
We were told children should be seen and not heard.
Thankfully, this type of behaviour can be changed with education and the ongoing support of your leadership team. Remember, as a person working with children, you're expected to uphold the values of the organisation rather than your personal beliefs. If you're not familiar with your organisation's values, ask to see its policies and procedures. It should also have a vision and values statement and a commitment statement as well. These documents describe how the organisation prioritises children and their safety. If you don't have them, then maybe this is an opportunity to get together with some of your co-workers and create them. An easy starting point is the Guide to the Child Safe Standards. You can contact the OCG if you want to find out more about developing these sorts of foundation documents. Make sure you involve children if you can. Now, we need to understand the types of harm children can be exposed to. I understand this can be confronting, particularly for people who have a connection to abuse in their personal histories. One of the reasons it's so serious is that its effects can continue long into adulthood. Please, get support if you need to. Abuse can be broken down into 4 types: physical abuse, is a non-accidental injury or pattern of injuries. The application of any unreasonable physical force to a child is a crime in New South Wales. Psychological harm can occur when someone's behaviour damages the confidence and self-esteem of a child or young person. In some cases, it can result in emotional disturbance or mental trauma. Although it's possible for one-off incidents to cause serious harm, in general, it's ongoing incidents that cause the greatest impact. Ill treatment and neglect occur when a parent or caregiver consistently fails to give a child or young person the basic things needed for their growth and development. Sexual abuse is also known as a sexual offence or sexual misconduct. It includes sexual touching, grooming, child abuse material, and discussing sexual behaviour when it isn't necessary. It's a crime in New South Wales for an adult to involve a child or young person in any kind of sexual activity.
This is getting a bit heavy for me. There's no one here who would do this to kids.
We have to know about this stuff, Fred.
Now we're going to look at offenders. Unfortunately, there is no easy way to identify adults who deliberately want to harm children. They can be of any age and come from all walks of life. Because we can't form an easy picture of them, we have to look out for specific behaviours. One thing offenders often do is manipulate the power imbalance between adults and children. All children are vulnerable because of their age. Some have additional vulnerabilities. Offenders build relationships with children by treating them differently to other children. Can anyone tell me what this is called?
Grooming?
Yes, grooming is gaining the trust of a child in order to later abuse them. It can be difficult to identify because it often begins with little things that look innocent. Because it starts small, people may accept the behaviour, even if it breaks the rules. Offenders often act in a charming way or in a way that looks like they're allowed to do these things. They may even encourage others to break the rules in order to disguise their own rule breaking. They can groom parents and carers, colleagues, and even the wider community so their actions appear to put them in a positive light. They may seem to be a pillar of the community. Offenders will test the water to see what they can get away with. This applies to children, but also to the adults caring for them. If the child is unable to stop the offender's inappropriate conduct and adults don't report it or stop it, the behaviour is likely to escalate. For example, it may become more physical while perhaps still looking innocent. It could be a hug or tickling or having a child sit on their lap. The offender will continually see how far they can go without being questioned. They're looking to see if the caring adults in the child's life will question their actions, while still trying to make their behaviour seem normal. One of the things offenders need is privacy. They'll try and create opportunities to be alone with a child. This may occur physically, in a secluded area of the building, for example. They may use a phone or social media because online interactions are harder to spot. Offenders can manipulate the protective adults in the child's life by flattering them directly or through the child. They might try to make them believe that they are valuable, perhaps even vital, to the child's happiness or success. Offenders will build the trust of the caring adults so that if they're accused of something, the other adults may even question the accusations, believing the offender is too nice. Offenders will go to great lengths to access the child unsupervised and to ensure that they don't get caught. They may try to convince the child that what they do in their relationship is special or that they're in love. They may frighten them into thinking they'll be punished if they tell, or that no one will believe them. It's also likely that the offender will try to exclude any supporting peers from the child's life. They don't want the child telling their friends. If the offender is allowed to increase the inappropriate behaviour, it's more likely that the child will be abused.
I'm getting why it's good to know this stuff, but come on. If it happened here, we'd spot it in a second.
Yeah, surely they're easy to recognise. They're the creeps, the ones that give you an icky feeling.
I'll tell you about a guy my sister used to work with. I met him once. I thought he was nice. Actually, to tell the truth, I thought he was great. Kathy told me later how he broke the rules. little ones at first, like tickling children. He'd take his favourites outside to rough play where no one could see him. He'd babysit children at their homes for free. He'd turn up at their soccer games and birthday parties. He'd encourage other adults to break the rules as well. Later, he was convicted of abusing young boys.
But so obvious he was up to something.
But he seemed nice, Fred. He was very charming and appeared to have a genuine affinity towards children. Many of the adults around him believed that when he broke the rules, it was because he was going the extra mile for kids. Because each staff member only saw one breach of the rules, or a few small instances, he was able to get away with things. It was only later when they reviewed what had happened that they saw the broader picture. He persistently breached their code of conduct, and he encouraged others in the organisation to do the same. The staff failed to report his breaches, and some began to ignore the code as well when they saw him not following it. It meant it stopped being useful. Management didn't follow up the breaches they saw. He shouldn't even have gotten the job there. If they'd checked his references, they would have found a record of unacceptable behaviour at his old workplace. This is why you should always report even insignificant breaches, because when they're put together with others, they can paint a very different picture.
I've never thought of it like that before.
The people who sexually offend against children are often classed in the following categories: determined, opportunistic, or situational offenders. A determined offender is a persistent, calculating person with a sexual interest in children. They're prepared to invest a great deal of effort to achieve their goal and can be very skilled at grooming, offending, and avoiding detection. Typically, society views them as pedophiles. In a child-related organisation, it can be difficult to identify them because they're often charming and respected. Their grooming and abuse may go unnoticed for some time. They can be the person you least expect. If your organisation has any weaknesses in its child-safe systems, they'll try to exploit them. They could even be attracted to your organisation if you have lax systems and a poor culture of protecting children. Conversely, they're more likely to be deterred from working in organisations that value children and have strong child-safe practices. On Saturday mornings, one boy worked as a referee. Clubs typically keep referees separate from players, so this boy found himself sharing a room with an adult referee. Unfortunately, the adult took the opportunity of being alone with the boy to groom him and later abuse him. He was only identified as an offender when police in Queensland found he was running an online platform to share child abuse material. The boy reported his actions after the man had been arrested. The club found there'd been a number of shortcomings in its risk management strategies. It hadn't considered that adults and children would be alone in that situation. It hadn't verified the adults working with children check. If it had, it would have found the adult had been barred from working with children. It didn't have a culture of supporting children and young people to report abuse. In short, it was an environment the abuser was probably attracted to because of its poor approach to child safety. Now we're going to look at opportunistic offenders. These are people who'll exploit opportunities for personal gain, although they're unlikely to do it if it requires significant effort. They won't necessarily look to abuse children, but they may take advantage if an opportunity arises. They may not invest much time in planning their offence. They could be a coach giving a child a lift home. During the trip, they decide that abusing the child won't be detected, perhaps because they found out that the child doesn't have a supportive home life. They may try to convince the child they're dependent on them for their success. Once the child believes them, they decide to exploit it. The final group is situational offenders. These people often have conventional social values. In social settings, they might even express their disgust for those who offend against children. They may have no criminal history and be generally well regarded. They usually have adequate self-control and understand that harming a child is wrong. However, their continual and close interaction with children may lead them to form what they think is a special relationship with a child. For example, they may be a teacher who's feeling lonely or insecure. They're looking for affection. They start a relationship with a child that they think is similar to a relationship they'd have with an adult. They may even claim it's love and that the child is a mutual partner. They will attempt to convince the child that they have to protect them and their relationship. Whatever the offender's motivation, this kind of relationship is wrong, and it doesn't excuse the behaviour.
But I thought that most kids are abused randomly or in their homes, not in organisations.
It's rare that a child is snatched from the street, but it's not necessarily someone in the home who harms them either. Regardless of it being at home or in an organisation, most children are abused by someone they know, trust, and depend on. For abuse to occur in an organisation, you need 3 things: a vulnerable child, an offender, and an environment where the abuse can't be seen. For example, on the news the other day, there was a story about a long daycare centre where a married worker was sexually abusing children and sending photos of them to her new online boyfriend. Her crimes went undetected until the lover, a known pedophile, was arrested and his computer was seized. The investigation uncovered he had 3 women abusing children on his behalf and sending him pictures.
How could she do it though and not get caught?
An investigation showed that this particular worker always volunteered for nappy change, a job most people disliked. When she did it, she'd shut the door. Adults weren't supposed to be alone with children or have their phones on them, but these rules were overlooked. Co-workers spoke of the woman as having assumed a superior role, so other staff didn't believe they could question her. She was also good friends with the manager, and because of this, the staff were also worried about raising concerns about her conduct. Let's now look at the stages an offender will typically go through to abuse children. The first step is the person's internal motivation. It's recognising they're attracted to a child or young person. As we've discussed, some people are compulsively drawn to children. For others, it may be triggered by a one-off event or their continual close contact with children. The second step is to overcome their internal inhibitions. The offender has to somehow justify that what they want to do is appropriate, although it's clearly not. Most of us have a little voice in our heads that says sexual abuse of a child is wrong. An offender switches off that voice. The next step is to create opportunities for abuse to occur while avoiding detection. This is where grooming starts. They'll look for that one thing that makes a child vulnerable and manipulate it. Once the offender feels confident they won't be caught, they'll find ways to be alone with the child. The final step is overcoming the child's resistance. They'll basically say anything to make the child do what they want, and also not tell anyone about it. In an organisational setting, offenders may use their social standing to leverage cooperation. They may threaten the child, someone they love, the child's family, or the child's future success. They may convince the child that the abuse is normal or that it's how you show you love someone. As an example, one dance teacher would ask his young students if they'd eaten junk food during the week. If they had, the teacher would make them weigh in while naked, explaining that this was their true body weight. He would be with them while they did this. Parents weren't allowed to watch their child's class. He encouraged parents to allow their children to hug him to show their gratitude. They'd be reprimanded by him if their children didn't do it. He also encouraged students to post dance poses on the organisation's social media, with one particular sexualised pose being favoured. The student with the most likes would get special privileges. It took some brave students to speak out so that eventually this behaviour and worse was revealed. Although there'd been previous allegations about the conduct of the teacher with students, he'd been able to conceal them as he was a sole trader with a very successful dance company. Parents were worried that speaking up against him would compromise their children's inclusion in dance competitions. A review found that there was nothing in the organisation's code of conduct that said an adult shouldn't be alone with a child, or that parents should be encouraged to sit in on classes. There was no social media policy, and no policy describing when it was appropriate for adults to touch children, such as to correct posture, and when it wasn't appropriate. Children weren't empowered to speak up, and adults didn't know how to report his actions. Okay, that's most of the bad stuff over with. The good news is that there are a lot of things you can do to prevent abuse. Now's a good time to pause and have a break if you want one.